In the board game Dice Forge, you play one of 4 heroes, called on by the gods to perform mythical feats in a competition to be permitted to join their ranks. Wait a second, that sounds an awful lot like Greek mythology. Hello and welcome. I'm Zylla, and this is my Athenaeum. And today I want to talk to you about what happens when we take academic analysis to a board game. What kind of questions can we even ask, and what sorts of knowledge do we hope to gain? Now, to be honest, there's a whole field of study called ludology out there, the study of games, and I've only barely scratched the surface of it myself. But there's beginning to be a really wonderful interaction between that field and my own, the study of ancient Greece and Rome. And that's where I'd like to get started. And if you've watched my other board game analyses on this channel, go check out Pandemic or Terraforming Mars, why don't you? You'll have heard me say that usually when a board game does get some kind of analysis, it's about the mechanics of the game, not really the narrative or the setting or what it encourages you to do. And honestly, I think that those are going to be the most fruitful directions for board game studies in general, but also for archaeogaming in particular, since so often that narrative or the incentives are all about the ancient theming in the first place. And that theming is extremely popular. There are hundreds of games about the ancient world and history, everything from Stone Age to Tzolk'in, from Shogun to Colosseum. If you search just the word ancient on Board Game Geek, you get about 400 results. And that doesn't account for any of the games I just mentioned, let alone Dice Forge. So let's talk about Dice Forge and why I think it's such a good example to work through. To begin with, there's the setup.
Greetings, mortal. The stories of your heroic feats have reached our divine realm. In our infinite generosity, we offer you the chance to become a demigod and take a seat among us. Yet you are not the only hero who could attain this honor. We have created a great tournament to see who is most worthy, and to entertain us, for we gods are sometimes bored to death. Prepare to leave the mortal world, as the tournament will unfold across celestial islands. Each was created by one of us, and you will note that we have different tastes.
This excellent beginning shows us a few things. First of all, we are definitely in the ancient Greek mode of what hero means. This is about mystical weapons and great feats and triumphs, not so much about moral character or self-sacrifice. Second, we're definitely not actually in ancient Greece or Greek mythology, because that would have been very simple to include here. Instead, what we have is an ahistorical setting, one that is mirroring Greek mythology as we know it. This is borne out by the board, where we have floating islands that do, in fact, represent different tastes of the gods. These are realms of influence that will be familiar to anybody who knows Greek mythology. The forge, the woods, the sea. The first island belongs to the forge god, Hephaestus, or, if you're one of those Roman heathens, Vulcan. You can tell this pretty clearly. It's got a crucible pouring molten metal into a form, a giant hammer, one of the main tools of the trade, an ornately wrought golden chest fine enough for the halls of the gods. But nowhere in any of the text, on the board, in the rules, on the box, does it say the name of any one god. There's nothing telling you explicitly that this is the Forge God's island. It just is. For the sake of not making this video overly long, I will spare you my analysis of the rest of the board, but if you do want to see me doing exactly that, you can find that on my Patreon, link in the doobly-doo. Suffice to say that the gods of this game are clearly shaped after Greek mythology, and so too are the playable hero characters. The most obvious one is Heracles. Hercules, whatever. Here he is in his lion-themed costuming, his muscles so big he's practically bursting out of his framing. He's got a fresh, boyish face and golden hair that really puts me more in mind of Disney's Hercules than anything ancient. Which brings us another good question, which is, how much of this is directly received Greek mythology and how much is from other intermediary sources? Fun fact, I've never actually seen Disney's Hercules. I don't want to, and you can't make me eat the Funyuns. Once you notice Babyface, it's hard not to see Odysseus in this other hero. This mysterious figure with a mischievous grin on their face, a backpack full of scrolls, and wiry build. I love that the portrayal is gender ambiguous, leaving room for almost anyone to see themselves in this often disguised and crafty hero. Odysseus. Problematic fave. That leads us to our femme hero. Now, I imagine this was a little bit tricky for the developers. There aren't a huge amount of options in Greek mythology. Personally, I would have gone with Atalanta, but Here they seem to have gone with Medea. Do I know it's Medea for sure? No, of course not. No more than I know that any of the rest of these are accurate. But hear me out. Our hero here is depicted with a magical flame. Medea was a well-known witch, not something super common in popular Greek myths. And I think that that's appealing if you're designing a modern fantasy game because of the well-known tropes of fighting types in modern fantasy. If you think about something like D&D, you have your different classes of fighters and a wizard or a sorcerer. So if you want to go with a more magical type, this seems like a really good pick. Secondly, look at how she's dressed. As opposed to the others who have sort of a, something that looks vaguely Greek or generically European, our femme hero has a big patch of fur over one shoulder and armor that looks almost Amazonian. This, I think, might be a reference to Medea coming from the shores of the Black Sea in far-off Colchis. Finally, we have our shield and spear fighter. Yes, I know it's a glaive. I'm working with what I have here. I think this is meant to be Achilles. Not because there's all that much distinguishing here beyond that Achilles did fight with spear and shield, but because a lot of the other options are either too obscure or wouldn't really look like a soldier in the way that this one does. So, we have placed ourselves quite firmly in not Greece. AU fantasy Greece. Excellent. So let's get into the mechanics. We need to talk about dice. Dice are one of the oldest forms of gaming that we can point a finger to, and they're found pretty much all over the world. Everything from knuckle bones to I Ching sticks are basically dice. We actually know a fair bit about dice games in ancient Greece and Rome. We even have Roman dice towers. More even than that, this game refers to dice as your weapons. And having the gods forge your weapons? Hard to get more classically heroic than that. Just ask Aeneas or Achilles. And you do get to forge your weapons here. Well, okay, not like forged in a fire or anything, but you do actually get to use your God's given resources and the heroic feats you perform to replace faces on your dice. And yes, this does actually work in the physical game. Here, I'll show you. Now that we've covered what in the game is good to talk about, let's dive into the actual questions. I've got 4 basic categories of inquiry. First, thematic questions. How historically accurate is the game trying to be? When you look at the variance between the mythology or history and what's in the game, do those changes form a pattern? Are they haphazard? Do they help or hinder the gameplay? For Diceforge, the easy answer is that they don't have any claim to historicity. They've deliberately taken a step back and not named any names so that they have room to play. It's easy to have a purely heroic Medea or a combined Demeter and Persephone island because you don't need to put the specific name to it in order for it to be vaguely recognizable. Another thematic question might be, how abstract is the perspective of the game? Like for Diceforge, you're playing as an individual hero, competing for an individual prize. We'll come back to this one. The second category of question is mechanical. We've already talked about how the actual physical act of rolling dice plays into the theme of antiquity, but what are the actions that you can take on your turn? Well, there are only 2 here. You can perform a heroic feat, or you can forge your weapon. Those both fit pretty neatly into the paradigm of Greek heroic mythology. That leads to our third category of inquiry, narrative. What does the game encourage you to do? What role does it ask you to take on? Now, from the art, you would suspect that you have an individual hero with particular strengths and weaknesses, but actually, in terms of gameplay, they're all exactly the same. They have the exact same starting resources, the exact same powers, the exact same actions that they can take. And so despite that very beautiful individual art, the game immediately re-abstracts you right back out. Which brings me to my 4th category of inquiry, which was generously provided to me by my fellow scholars at the panel I was on. Who made this game? Who is the designer, the artist, the publisher? What is their influence on this game, and how does it shape the antiquity that we get out of it? With Diceforge, there are some really fruitful directions to go here. The designer was one Régis Bonisset, who has also designed some other games like Seasons and Zylla, and some others that I don't know enough about to pass much along to you. Sorry, we're just going to talk about those 2. In both Seasons and Zylla, we see Bonisset have both a strong interest in the narrative, since both of those are set in the same world, but also in the concepts of competitiveness and heroism. In Seasons, you are magicians in a 3-year tournament to summon the most monsters and artifacts that you can find. And in Lords of Zylla, you are Lords of the Realm going out to defeat those summoned monsters and gain influence over the people you protect. I don't know as much about the artist Biboum. I love his work. I've heard a rumor that he was involved somehow in Phoenix Rising and Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which would be a lovely tie-in if he's been working on conceptions of Greek heroism, but I can't find confirmation of that anywhere, so if you happen to know, leave me a comment. As for the publisher, Libellud has a core philosophy that revolves around the imagination of play and the emotional and educational opportunities it affords. And you can see this reflected in the grouping of games that we see them publish. Not only did they put out all 3 of Bonace's games that I've mentioned, but also games like Mysterium and Dixit, which are very focused around vivid imagery and interpersonal communication. I also feel the need to point out that Libellude's name is a variant of libellum in Latin, or little book or chapbook, as one might make of poetry. It's not relevant, it just makes me happy. So given all that knowledge we've just acquired, what can we take away in an archaeogaming sense? Well, first of all, we have a publisher interested in education and visualization, plus a designer who is focused on themes of competition and heroism, and all of that sort of tied into this fantasized version of ancient Greece as a theme. The theming and mechanics of this game allow one to take on the role of a Greek hero, albeit a sort of generalized one, unless you're paying really close attention. You get to conquer heroic feats, forge divine weapons, and, in a laurel wreath victory, ascend to godhood. All in all, a very engaging and honestly quite thematically clear way of stepping into this role in a subject that many kids and adults really love, without bending the rules of antiquity too much. Honestly, it's a really good game. It's in my usual rotation for game nights. I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive on Diceforge and archaeogaming. If this kind of analysis is something that you'd like to see more of, please leave me a comment. There's a whole world of archaeogaming out there waiting. And hey, keep learning, friends.